all that work of relationships, all that tough stuff we have to engage in life. But if we do it without being attached, overly clinging to it, if we do it with self-control, controlling our deepest selves, controlling our animal urges and instincts, if we can do it with equanimity, with respect, and with a lack of clinging and trying to control it, trying to own everything that we engage with, that's the difference. Islam, in the Quran, you'll find a passage about this too. Those who spend in ease as well as in adversity, and those who restrain their anger and pardon men, Allah loves the doers of good. So this equanimity, this self-control very much shows up in the Islamic tradition as well. Another passage that illustrates commonalities to be found in the world's religions. Another set of passages have to do with non-attachment, very much related to self-control. Now, just to step back a bit, I think it's really important as we look at these scriptures that I'm reading to remember that religions have a lot in common, but they're also very different. And I believe personally in a pluralistic attitude toward other faiths. I think that other religions can be as good for other people as my Christian faith is for me. And my own experience just confirms this constantly as I work with students of all different faith traditions who are sincere, loving, caring people. And it is unimaginable to me to be able to have the hubris or the excessive pride to say that somehow my religion is superior to theirs. But that's different than being relativistic, you know? That's different than saying that, well, then they're all equal, they're all the same, they're all just as good as the next. The world isn't that simple. The fact is that religions are very different than each other in many important ways, even though they have these amazing similarities. They share common threads. They share common origins, for that matter, in many, many ways that are very surprising. Just give you one that I learned recently, and that's about beads, right? It turns out that prayer beads started with the Hindus. They had little beads that they would spin as they said their prayers, repeating their mantras. And then when the Muslims when the Muslims got to India, they copied it. The Buddhists also copied it from the Hindus at the same time. But when the Muslims came into India in the Mughal period, they started using prayer beads to do their prayers. And when the Muslims made it to Spain, they brought their prayer beads with them. And the Catholics caught on to it, and that's how we got the rosary. And in fact, the rosary is so old that the English word bead used to be spelled differently than we spell it now. It used to be spelled B-E-D-E, and it meant prayer. To bead was to pray. So the rosary, I mean, how Catholic is that? But it turns out to be how Muslim is that? And how Hindu is that? And how Buddhist is that? It's all over the world. So religions have these literally common threads, the common thread that holds the beads together, but they're also very different in really important ways. And to pick up on those differences and respect them and learn from them, it's kind of like being able to see our own religion through it with 3D glasses. You know, you go to the theaters nowadays and you put on special glasses and you go, whoa, that's going on. I never would have seen that if I didn't have these glasses on. Well, I think that putting on the 3D glasses of interfaith understanding and learning really helps you see what's going on in Christianity in a way that you would never see if you didn't have exposure to other faiths. I learned more about my faith by hanging out with people of other faiths than I ever dreamed I would. So I am getting an amazing education in Christianity by hanging out with hundreds of students who are Hindu, Muslim. We have the Sikh club, we have a Zoroastrian club on our campus. So there's so much to learn from these students. So as you listen to these passages, think about the commonalities, but also think about the differences, and let those differences be 3D glasses to help you understand Christianity as well, and Judaism, or Judeo-Christian heritage. So these passages are about non-attachment, a topic that shows up in all the world's religions. From the wisdom tradition, again, in the Bible, Ecclesiastes, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This is also vanity and striving after wind. I think Ecclesiastes is very underrated as a book in the Bible. It's really, it's kind of cynical almost. Everything is striving after wind. It's all vanity, vanity, vanity. And yet there's wisdom there. There's tremendous wisdom still for us today. To let go of our hang-ups about how important we are. Get a little humility. It's a whole book about humility. From Jesus, New Testament, those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who want to lose their life for my sake will save it. That salvation comes from non-attachment, not only to our belongings, to our stuff, to our careers, to our status, but even life itself. A hard teaching. In Buddhism, you have a great emphasis on this. Those whose compulsions are gone, who are not attached to food, whose sphere is emptiness, signlessness, and liberation, they're hard to track, like birds in the sky. Like birds in the sky. Think of Jesus talking in the Sermon on the Mount. Be like the birds of the air that don't gather in barns, and yet God feeds them. God takes care of them. Don't be attached. Don't worry. So the Buddha is attributed to this passage in the Dhammapada. In Hinduism, from the Bhagavad Gita, big theme there too. When a man dwells in his mind on the object of sense, attachment to them is produced. From attachment springs desire, and from desire, anger. From anger arises bewilderment. From bewilderment, loss of memory. And from loss of memory, the destruction of intelligence. And from the destruction of intelligence, he perishes. One thing leads to another, eh? Attachment leads to our downfall. And then from Taoism, this is from the Tao Te Ching, a wonderful translation by Stephen Mitchell, who lives right up the road in Ojai here, actually. Giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing, acting with no expectations, leading and not trying to control. This is the supreme virtue. Having without possessing. How do you do that? Now, I have to make a little confession here. Constantly with my wife, we'll see something beautiful or go someplace lovely, and she'll go, oh, wow, I wish I had that, or oh, if we could only live there. And I always say, honey, if you can see it, you own it. It's yours. You see it, you own it. And she looks at me kind of like, that wasn't good enough. It's me trying to get off the hook for, not spending more money. Anyway, but there is some truth in this. I will stand by my words to a point. What do we own, really? Really? When I go to a place like Red Rock Canyon up in the Santa Monica Mountains, and I look at those beautiful rock formations and the incredible vistas when I go hiking up there, do I own that any more or less than I own my house, on which my name is on title? What's the difference there? I look at my house, I look at the red rocks. It's a way of seeing the world and understanding our relationship to it, of non-attachment. And it's liberating. It frees us from clinging and all the pain that comes with it. Another topic that shows up in all the great world religions is mysticism. Now, when we talk about mysticism in religion, we're not talking about mist. We're not talking about mystery, per se. Although life is mysterious, we're talking about the experience of the divine, the direct experience that human beings have with divinity, within ourselves. Finding God, finding the ultimate reality within ourselves, or through our own experience. And this shows up in different ways in all the different faiths. But when you look at these different ways that this is expressed, there are these common threads weaving through all of them. Christianity, to me, one of the great keys of the Scripture, the great keys of the Christian faith and the Christian Scripture, is this one from Galatians, from St. Paul. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. What would happen if we interpreted the whole Christian faith on the basis of that one passage? Then we would take this all personally. We realize our Scripture is not about some dogma, doctrine, beliefs, stuff we have to accept in order to be saved. We realize this is an experience that I have experienced the crucifixion. I have experienced the resurrection. I have been through the passage of death. I have been through the passage of rebirth and new life. I experience God directly within me through love, through compassion, through mystical engagement with the whole cosmos inside of me and around me. This is an experience available to all of us, Christian and non-Christian alike. Another great mystic of the Christian church, another one besides St. Paul, was Meister Eckhart, 14th century German priest. And he said a line that still rings in my soul. He said in one of his sermons, for which he almost got condemned as a heretic, but he said, "The eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me." When you're able to see God, that is the moment when you experience God seeing you. The eye is a two-way street when it comes to the spiritual eye of engagement with God. Taoism from China is full of this kind of mysticism. This is a beautiful passage from the Tao Te Ching. Empty your mind of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings. That's a beautiful line right there. Watch the turmoil of beings, including your own turmoil. Prayer and meditation at its root is watching. It's watching your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own feelings, your own reactions to the world around you. If you can watch, if you can become unattached from your own inner experience long enough to see it and observe it, you will have a different relationship with it. That's a very powerful idea to be found in the Tao. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. The great saints and teachers of Hinduism have much to say about mystical union with God. Here's a couple from the last 100 or so years, famous gurus of India. Sri Ramakrishna. I see that God is walking in every human form and manifesting himself alike through the sage and the sinner, the virtuous and the vicious. Therefore, when I meet different people, I say to myself, God in the form of a saint, God in the form of the sinner, God in the form of the righteous, God in the form of the unrighteous. And then another wonderful saint that I admire a whole lot from early 20th century, Nisargadatta Maharaj. Nisargadatta, his whole practice was about mystical union with God. That was his whole basis of his teaching.